Good afternoon. I'm Rob Grimes, the CEO of the IFBTA, and I'm very pleased today to be moderating a webinar on securing the store of the future, how our QSR is transforming with the new business models. And this is a session that is put on by Fortinet, and we're very pleased to have a panel that includes both Fortinet and Hooters. But before we get started, let me go through a few housekeeping items. If you have questions, we will have a Q&A section. Please submit those questions via the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. If you want to direct your questions to one of our two panelists, you can specify which one, or we'll pick for you, or you can just say everyone. We would ask that you stay away from any questions regarding sales or pricing or any kind of political discussions, disparaging remarks, or anything else like that. The attendees are muted for this session, so you can chat or share your comments with the panel using the chat, but use the Q&A if you want to submit some questions for that. And as always, recording this webinar will be made available right after the call via ifbta.org, fortinet.com/retail, and on social media. With that, let me introduce our panelists today. And if you'll turn your cameras on, that'd be great, so we can see you. Great. So I'm really pleased today for this subject to really have two leaders in the industry from different ends. Karen Bird, the CIO of Hooters of America, and Courtney Radke, the CISO for the national retail at Fortinet. And both have a different perspective, although I'll cue you in right now that both actually have both the operations background, the technical background as well. So it should be a really good discussion today. But before we get started, perhaps, Karen, you could start with giving an introduction of yourself and your organization and just a couple of high-level thoughts on the subject to kick us off, and then we'll have Courtney do the same.
Sounds good, Rob. Thank you. So Karen Bird, as Rob said, I'm the CIO for Hooters of America. We actually have two brands, Hooters and Hoots Wings, that we're just launching the Hoots Wings concept. And I've been with the company for almost 4 years now. 4 quick years, and had a lot of opportunities and challenges, especially with COVID, as we all know, last year and this year. I think these are really good topics for all of us to go through. There has been so much change in the last year that none of us were prepared for, or, well, I wouldn't say we weren't prepared for, but that we weren't expecting. We weren't expecting technology to take off as quickly as it has. So there's going to be a lot of good conversation here in regards to, those technologies we've been dealing with, our stores of the future, and how do we secure them as well. So look forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you, Karen. Courtney?
Yeah, thank you, Rob, and thank you, Karen, for being here. Courtney Radke, I'm our CISO for National Retail. So I've been on this side for about 2 years now, but prior to that, I was in the QSR space for quite some time. So leading, several retail network architecture and security teams throughout QSR. So it's near and dear to my heart. And I agree with Karen that it was maybe we couldn't plan for the speed and scale of everything. And the events of the last several months have definitely rapidly expanded technology adoption, but it was always kind of there. We were always kind of moving that way anyway. It's just been, the needle's been moved forward a couple of years. So very excited to talk about, all the innovations that have already gone in, and then kind of where the rest of our industry is going.
And I think you'll agree with me as we start in our session with a few kickoff questions that Karen, has a wide experience in the QSR segment, not only with Hooters, but also Courtney has the operational background as the other piece of it. And so we're able to really to put together these two to have a meaningful discussion on some of the challenges and opportunities, or opportunities and challenges, I think was the order that Karen used to get us kicked off. But you know what? We did pose some questions up front as our attendees registered today, and I think it's a great way to kick off by starting with that. So why don't we start off with, how is technology allowing QSRs to pivot and expand on new business models more quickly? And I think, Karen, you said something about Hoots Wings, so maybe we start there, but you want to take a shot at that one first?
Sure. And we've talked about this on other sessions as well, is that, being prepared prior to COVID with online ordering and delivery, having delivery service partners engaged, really helped us get through this last year from a technology perspective. But I think, honestly, that, by having that in place, we've also opened up the digital environment much broader than we probably would have a year ago. So things like being able to do customer pay, right, with your own devices. That was something we all talked about years ago. We now, have that ability in our restaurants pretty easily. We've got call centers that we've talked about for years. Do we implement call centers for remote order taking? And so not only are we using call centers from that perspective, but the automation within the call center with the bots and being able to have computer assisted order taking versus people at the other end of the phone. So there's a lot of technology solutions that, like I said, we've talked about for years, but because of the way that we quickly advanced over this last year, we've been able to implement a lot, quicker than we would have in the past.
Courtney, the same question for you. What are you seeing that the operators are doing in this area?
Yeah, I think, as we said earlier, this is just kind of the acceleration of what was already in place over the last 5 years, and the speed and scale of it's been what we've had to keep up with, especially during the peak, right? 90% of customers were served off premises, so we had to either expand on what we had or put in new operational models, just as you said you did. Karen, and I think there's lots of avenues that's just expanded, right? This is website, this is mobile, this is the ability to personalize through whatever ways that you can, really however you need to reach the customer and however the customer needs to be reached to reach you. I think that's what we've been able to expand upon, and thankfully technology over the last 5 years has evolved in such a way that it's allowed operators to do this. I think 5 years ago, if we would have been in this position, could restaurants been resilient? Yes, absolutely. It's a resilient industry, but the ability to quickly adapt to change, to pivot using new technology that we have, expanding on what was already there. I think that's been kind of the saving grace, the silver lining of a lot of this is we realize we can rapidly adapt. We can bring on this technology safely and securely, though there are some things that have to be done first to do so. And I think we're going to see, over the next year or so, what's been put in place, what's going to stay, and what we maybe need to change that's been rapidly, thrown in.
Well, I think you bring up a very good point on that a lot of things, and Karen, you may want to comment on this, many things were in the works already. Many companies were thinking about different types of technologies and things they wanted to do. What happened was we had acceleration through necessity here. And, were there really new things that came to the forefront, Karen, for you, or most of the things that were somehow on the drawing board but weren't perhaps prioritized or this far up in the roadmap?
Yeah, I think most of the stuff that we had was on either in place, or on the roadmap to get done. But I would say, Rob, one of the things, because we all were moving so quickly, there's things probably that we moved a little too quick on, and now we're going back and we're having to reevaluate. As an example, our network infrastructure was there, but how do we make it better? Because as you can imagine, the demand that's coming in now from all the digital channels into our restaurants. Number one, we got to make sure our networks are up to par and can handle this additional, demand that's coming in. And then I would say the other part is that, we're overwhelming our restaurants, as our restaurant staff, our cooks in the kitchen, as well as, all of our employees in the restaurant, because, we don't, while we have the ability to get the orders in, we don't have the ability to throttle all these orders that are coming in if we need to. So I would say that piece has been the interesting part to deal with this. Yeah, we were able to quickly do it, but we're killing people in the meantime as well in some cases. And
so some of that was a technology comment there, like the throttling, which of course the pizza guys have been doing for a long time on Super Bowl Sunday, right? But
Yep.
But I think the other parts of it is it's going to create, maybe it wasn't the technologies that were needed or some of the projects, but it's going to create different areas of distribution and different ways to free up space. So maybe it's more of that. So Courtney, people are starting to talk about the store of the future, and I know that you cover retail as much as you cover, food service. Um, how are people starting to define, what the store of the future is, not just by business models and new business opportunities, but perhaps by footprint and some of the things that Karen just alluded to?
Well, it's different footprints for sure. We go outside of the restaurant space and we see, traditional store footprints shrinking. That now the back of the store is becoming a fulfillment center. It's becoming a warehouse. It's becoming, how do I distribute the goods to get them in the customer's hands as soon as possible? And we're seeing that, in the restaurant industry as well. From dark or ghost kitchens to virtual kitchens, kitchens as a service. There's a lot of different models out there. And will that be the store, the restaurant of the future? I don't know. Some of those will probably stay. Some of those different concepts, as you've set up with Hoots, Karen, I think those will kind of be what the restaurants of the future look like. But really, it's about the personalized experience. It's about the data that we collect and how we create those experiences for the customer. I think that's what the store of the future is. It's about attracting, customers and maintaining them through experience enhancements, retaining them through that consistent delivery. I think that's the store of the future. It's about, how do I get better brand loyalty? And from a technology standpoint, I think that's how you reach the customer and how the customer reach you, as we said. But it's also about, as you said, Karen, the care and feeding of the technology that's behind the scenes, that infrastructure that was never meant to be agile. The mobile apps and the cloud is all agile, but the infrastructure behind the scenes, those are no longer long-lived assets. And so I think it's going to make restaurants and retailers and everybody in general just more cognizant of the investments that they make, because they may not be able to predict what's going to happen 3 years from now. So they want to make sure their infrastructure is going to support whatever happens, that scales, able to move, adopt new business models. So gaining customers, making loyalty inherent again in retail, because we've kind of gotten away from inherent loyalty in retail, and then having traditionally long-lived assets that were kind of static become easier to scale and adapt and pivot to change.
Well, so you actually just threw out a whole bunch of different things in that particular piece.
Yeah.
Karen, are you seeing? Do you have a definition of store of the future? I mean, most operators have some sort of future design, future something in there. Is there a definition of store of the future for you, or within QSR where you think it will go?
Yeah, I mean, as Courtney mentioned, real estate has gotten really, expensive. It's harder and harder every day to find locations for bigger, box, restaurant locations. So for our Hoots Wings, I mean, they're small footprints, in our strip malls, in caps in the strip mall. So really take advantage of, those smaller real estate, buys. So, that store, I think the Hoots Wings stores that we're doing, I mean, they're highly, delivery models, delivery takeout. I mean, there's very limited seating inside the restaurant. And so, when you think about that, I mean, it's really, you've got to, make sure that, your technology in place is going to serve that model. So I think that's going to be, part of our, it will be our future model. It is, how do you service your customers, from a delivery, from a pickup standpoint, as well as, in your restaurants. And then, Courtney, I just wanted to follow up on something you said about the infrastructure. In the past, it's been, in our full service restaurants, we've always, for the most part, had the ability, if you had a network problem, that, you had the ability to fail over into your POS and, run your POS transactions. Well, with all of these digital orders coming in, it's demanding that you be always on from a network perspective, and be able to, continue to bring those orders in, even if you've got some kind of, internet or broadband failure that's happening. So being able to, to fail over into your 3G, 4G, 5G, cellular backups, that becomes increasingly important. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you could, a couple of years ago, if you failed over, you could batch up to a certain amount and you take on that risk because you could still support that customer. But now we always talk about it. It's not protecting the circuit. It's about protecting the experience. And even if you're in, a degraded state, am I providing that same level of experience to that customer? They shouldn't notice. That should be transparent to them. And it's especially going to be more prevalent as we're having more digital means to interact with the customer. You have delivery services that they require connectivity if they're not riding on their own circuit. So, that always on experience it's just going to become the norm now. We're not going to be able to have a traditional failover where we're in a degraded state.
Well, it's the so you guys have already started to jump into the next and the third kickoff question about securing the new technologies. But what you're actually bringing up is, in the past, I think people were really looking at the failover and what do they do, but they were thinking very traditionally as a single unit, right? Mm-hmm. But today, because of the communications methods, you're probably going to have 2 or 3 different things that rails that transactions and things are traveling on at any point in time that are not failover. They just happen to be all in place at the same time. And then if you couple that with non-traditional locations or pop-ups and all the other things that are coming, that just creates an even greater challenge, because it's the data, but it's how you secure it, right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, that's absolutely correct. And it's creating more complexity in these environments as well. And as we all know, complexity is that enemy of security. So I think as we bring on more technology and as we have to shift into new operational models, we have to make sure that we're not doing it at a detriment to security.
Mm-hmm. So if I could just put you on the, on the hot seat for a second there, Courtney. In the past, when there's been data breaches and problems, people point the fingers at different people. They point at the POS company, they point at whoever it is, right, that's doing it. The back office, that somebody's on the PC doing something. Who is responsible? Who actually is responsible now? Because there's so many players involved. With that flow of data to and from, whether it's to the employee, it may be the guest technology themselves, the online, the delivery, then you're covering loyalty amongst their shared. So who actually is responsible?
Yeah, and it is the who. And so it's not a POS system or a web application, which is the number one vector now. It's the who. The threat vector is always the people. How can threat actors compromise the people? It's either making a mistake, it's a misconfiguration, it's a phishing email that plays on emotion or something else, especially in the last 12 months. So it is really the who, and how do you protect, educate your people is probably one of the best investments to protect against risk. Now, can you put guardrails in place? Absolutely. You have to put in at least a modicum of security. And as the environments have become more complex, we have to gain greater visibility over all the technology we put in. But number one is always people. It's going to be a mistake, a misconfiguration, or a compromise of the actual person. That's where it lies. Now, POS 5 years ago used to be the number one threat vector to get the data. Now the data shouldn't really reside on the POS. It should be tokenized, encrypted, but it resides somewhere else. It resides in the web applications or mobile apps. So the POS is still a point of compromise for them to get somewhere else, or now with ransomware to just disrupt your operations entirely. Now you can't sell anything at the store. You can't service customers. So it's always the people, but it's how they're getting to the people now that's changed a bit.
Well, I think that, Karen, you may want to add one more thing in there. It may not just be the different parts and pieces, but out of necessity, things are thrown in at the last minute. And so you may not, when you're putting something in or attaching it, have consideration of all of the connection points and the security pieces that are there. And I don't know, Karen, if you had that experience, in how you were trusting people as you had to put different technologies in. And connected devices as well, by the way, I would throw in there. So what kind of steps are you taking as the operator to secure all the new technologies and operations?
So good question, Rob. I mean, late last year, we actually implemented new security services all the way down into our restaurants. And so, we're monitoring, activity, at all our restaurants as well as our corporate headquarters. So I think the monitoring and alerting is important, because those are typically the things that you either don't do or do last, or, or don't do until there's a problem. So we're trying to get in place monitoring and alerting for everything we do, all the integrations in and out of our systems, and even with our, vendor, partners as well. So great question. I think, you really just have to continue being diligent and make sure that you have those, security services and processes in place. Courtney, you hit it head on. It's people too, all the time. I mean, we have training programs in place all the way down to our servers in the restaurants about who allow access to the systems and who not, and what they're supposed to be watching and looking for. So it's a constant task that you have to do, and you have to be diligent. And if you're not, that's when bad things happen.
So Karen, I'd just like you to expand on that for a moment. You just said that you had training programs that go down to the server. Now, by the way, I'm going to say that this is going to become even more complicated if we ever get to bring your own device and we're actually using the servers to use their own device, just like we are with the customers, right? But now they're connected directly in. Can you be a little bit more specific on the kinds of education and training you would give to the server?
Yeah, I mean, it's all part of PCI, right? We're required to do training on an annual basis, and as you're hiring employees into the restaurant. So, that you're not allowed, that they should never allow anybody access to any of their point of sale systems or into the back of the restaurant. So we do testing and, training around those types of activities. But, to your point about bring your own devices, we do allow our servers and employees in the restaurant to take training classes, or they're monitoring their scheduling and requesting time off using their own devices, but we try to geofence them within the four walls of the restaurant. So you're not dealing with those kind of issues outside the restaurant, and plus then there's always the pay issue that you got to deal with if they're doing things outside the restaurant.
So Courtney, I'm going to slightly change this question for you because she just brought up something that I know you and I have had some conversations on. Who would have thought that we would have had our staff in so many different places? And she just talked about geofencing within the restaurant and the devices and things, but there's a lot more to consider here. And I was sort of maybe hoping you would take a shot at connected guest, connected staff, remote workers, remote management. I mean, it's a holistic approach. You can't just sit there and say it's going to be one technology because you don't know what applications they're going to be accessing from where.
Yeah. I mean, it's a slippery slope. You want them to be more enabled. You want them to be more empowered to do training wherever. You want them to be as trained up as possible. But by offering that, you're also opening up some doors. So the connected guest, we're talking about, they're connecting through a mobile app. They're connecting through your Wi-Fi that you bring online. They're connecting through kiosks or something that you have on lot. The employees have line busting tablets. They have inventory tablets. They have real-time training, guest management, queuing management. And then we now know that a lot of the people working for these restaurants are not in these restaurants, right? They're doing remote tasks. So how do you, securely offer access, the ability to interact with the restaurants when they're not inside the four walls of that restaurant? And as we said, complexity, it's just driving up complexity. And a lot of restaurants, a lot of retailers cite that as that number one barrier to data security. So as you add in more, you have to have greater control, have to have greater visibility. And we're bringing a lot of this connected environments to customers because we want the data. We want to be able to monetize the data to create better personalized experiences, ultimately safer experiences for them as well. But it's that double-edged sword. I got to collect it to make it easier to create these experiences, but I also have it now, and we have to be able to secure it. It's tricky, and we're only going to get more data coming on, and the regulations around data, as we've seen, U.S. data privacy regulations mature, it's only going to get more difficult.
And I know we have some Europeans, by the way, on this call, so they may have a different aspect, a different view of that whole piece as well, because it's a different part to it. But Karen, your workforce is obviously working remotely, some of them. You're accessing things on a real-time basis, not necessarily looking at past history and things on that. Have you set any corporate policies that cut across the board for all workers, or do you have to have separate policies, for different types of workers at home and in virtual operations and things like that?
Well, all of our corporate staff, remote workers, our operations management, we have policies in place there. We implemented new services through Microsoft Security Services last year. As we had people go work remotely more and more, especially from our office here. And, we put in two-factor authentication, we beefed up our VPN services. So, that we can secure, they're working remotely and getting into our systems here. So yeah, did a lot of stuff this past year.
Well, there's a lot to think about that people perhaps didn't think about before. And sometimes they learn as they go along. I mean, it's sort of like bandwidth, right? I mean, you sort of learn as you go along. And, we used to deal with that problem when we said, let's go ahead and let our customers connect. We had bandwidth issues, right? So we tried to
Right.
throttle, to use your earlier thing. But now we have bandwidth issues, just, working across the board. So Courtney, I think 2 or 3 times you've now said the word personalized, 2 words, personalized experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like back to the future here. I sit there and I go, okay, the restaurant industry has talked about personalized experiences, loyalty and stuff like that for years, like the holy grail that they could never get there, like the hotel industry could get there and the gaming industry, and even sometimes retail could,
Mm-hmm.
because they were personalizing it. So now we have all this data. And
Mm-hmm.
why don't we look at the positive side of it? Where do you see the new data and opportunities really turning into an easily manageable, accessible, and implementable personalized experience? Where should the QSRs be? Because they were never the ones, by the way. It was always the fine dining, if anybody, right? Because they had the reservations. They knew who the person was. So why don't you drill down that a little bit?
Well, it's through the app. You have to get them to connect at some point, right, to your environment. It can't just be anomalous. They get to connect to your app or connect to a guest wireless. I think where we're going to be getting, and we're going to have to, because as I said, the data privacy regulations is how can I, as quickly as possible, gain as much information as possible, monetize that, get as much as I need of it, and then get rid of it, especially if apps get rid of it. For the longest time, it's been give me everything you got. Feed us all the data that's possible, and we will figure out what to do with it later. We were building personalization engines. We were trying to, monetize that through the app, through the website, something else. But now I think what we're going to see is we have a better ability to churn through that data with big data lakes, with AI, with a lot of this technology. It allows us to get ROI quicker than we ever had before. That way we can make sure that what we're collecting is valuable, who we're collecting it from, when we collected it, and when we're asked to get rid of it, we know exactly where it is and we can get rid of it when asked. So I think we're going to get to smarter data consumption and utilization. That's going to be kind of that holy grail that restaurant industry has always been. We've got a lot of means to collect it. Let's centralize what those means are, either through mobile apps or loyalty programs, and then monetize it as quickly as possible using things like AI. That's kind of really come into its own over the last couple of years.
Oh, you just beat me to it. So, okay. So Karen, over to you on this one, because, the other holy grail of all marketing people, and I can remember, a long time ago when they started saying, let's go, transaction level, storage, and people are saying, where are we going to store all this stuff? Well, now we have all this data. You mentioned AI earlier, Karen. So, and we know people are using AI from everything through as a matter of fact, some QSR companies are investing in AI companies, to do drive-through. So you have all this data now available to you didn't have before. So what exactly are the tools? How are you using, AI, or how are other QSRs, going to mine through and use this on a meaningful and timely basis?
Yeah, it's a great question, Rob, because I can tell you we're not using it that much now. It will be more in the future. If you go back to the loyalty, we're just implementing loyalty for our new Hoots Wings brand. And we've had it in place for our Hooters brand for the last year. But you raised a great question. It's, you have all this data and you have the systems that are, containing all this data, but quite frankly, we're a smaller company and we don't have all the resources to mine the data and really utilize the data. So we rely on our vendor partners to help us there, to put programs in place. Courtney, you said it right. We're using apps that are tied to our online ordering, and that's where we're engaging with our customers through the app, and providing their points and their earnings and what they're going to redeem. But again, we're relying on outside partners to help us do that right now, and we're not storing that data internally. So we got moves.
So is there some secret in there, Courtney, we should be looking at to, if we've got all this data available, which is definitely a plus, how do we mine and use that data and use it in a safe fashion, especially when you might have to share that with other third-party partners in order to do it?
Yeah, that's the thing. I think we're seeing a lot of companies come up that, from a third-party standpoint, just as Karen said, not a lot of organizations have the power to sift through all that themselves. They're partnering with somebody or investing in a technology to do that. So I think we're going to see some big maturity swings over the next couple years of who are the trusted partners that integrate directly with POSs, that integrate directly with your mobile apps and loyalty programs, that allow you to gain the value of the data. But as Karen said, you don't have to store the data. You kind of take that concern out.
Mhm.
I think the correlations and analytics engines that are coming up that are built into these platforms is going to be absolutely key. So I think it's just taking what was previously unstructured data. Hey, why was this valuable? And now we're able to gain value from it more quickly than we ever did. But I don't think it's going to be done, a lot of it internally. It's all going to be partnering,
Right.
Going through third-party integrations. And I think we're going to see a lot of those. They're going to be coupled with the POS providers out there, the delivery services, the loyalty and mobile apps. They're going to be as part of
Well, there's a lot of people who are collecting that data. They can provide different parts of it. We're going to have to secure that data each step of the way. And as we bring people in or share, we have to do that. It's interesting that, Courtney, I believe you use this, to me, the big terms of the past, and I don't know how many years ago it was, big data was a big term of the past, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then about 2 years ago, it started to become data analytics.
Mm-hmm.
AI was 10 years ago, but all of a sudden, because I can think of the movie AI, right? So when did that come out? But all of a sudden, AI finally seems to be coming back around as, what are we going to do with this? We can't figure it all out ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and so let's go ahead and do that. I wanted to shift the subject a little bit because in the last 2 weeks, the subject of labor has kept coming up. I mean, incessantly coming up. And we clearly have a labor issue in here in the industry right now, with labor and employee shortages in it. And while it may not be a complete data security piece, except as we're securing data about employees and things, how is the industry going to bounce back and be able to meet the demand of labor? And are there some tools and technology that should be considered in all this?
You want me to go first?
Yo, you got it. You have.
You hit the nail on the head, Rob. I mean, labor is a problem, not only in the restaurants, all of the services that are, the restaurants employ, distribution services, delivery, everywhere. And it is a significant problem right now. I mean, we're running, sometimes some of our restaurants are running with 4 cooks for the week when it was 4 cooks per shift. And I talked to all my, peers in the industry, and it's not just us, it's everybody. And so I think, what you're going to see, what we've started doing, we're going to start dialing back some of the technology solutions in order to focus on the restaurants and the operations of the restaurant. Because, like I mentioned before, the demand from all the digital channels that is coming into the restaurant, when you got 1 cook in the restaurant, it's just like, there's no way, right? There's no way that you can continue providing the operational experience that you need for your guests. So it's a huge problem. I don't know if any of us have an answer right now.
But I suspect actually, in thinking about this for like 30 seconds, that there's actually a data security issue in this one as well, because in order to get to the future staff or potential staff, you have to be connected. And they're going to be sharing information to make sure they're seen, but you need to share information in order to be able to get it. And so now you're connecting outside groups to try to solve an industry problem, here as well. And it's going to be the ability to get to as many people as possible,
Mm-hmm.
which is going to be a digital piece. I mean, Courtney, obviously they must be having to secure that data on the other side as well, because you're going to as many sites and searching for people as much as possible.
Yeah, it's not just job sites or one-to-one marketing. It's these virtual job fairs. It's virtual. Hey, you share me as much information as possible so we can make sure that we get people to these stores. It's also, having the ability for one worker that was traditionally, restaurant worker that was in one store. Now they can go between multiple stores, and you can share that information between multiple stores. And it's not just that, it's the front of the scenes. That's obviously first and foremost, protect the operations of these locations. We want to make sure that we do that. And I don't think a lot of customers are aware just how, dire it is in some cases. And the problem being is we don't want to tell them no. We don't want to tell customers, hey, we've got these digital channels. We have the ability for you to interact with it in more ways than ever. We don't want to say no. We don't want to shut that down because we want to protect the loyalty that we've built. And what that's doing is the more technology we brought on, now behind the scenes, the people that were supporting it from a network and security standpoint, there's not as many of them as well. And so they're having to be short staffed. They're having to do more with less. I think there's not a silver bullet for it. I hope that technology will enable us to work smarter, not harder, automate more things wherever possible, augment if we can with maybe robotics or something else. I don't know what the silver bullet is, but technology hopefully will be an enabler to making things easier. I think a lot of it's going to be time and
So Courtney, I'm going to let you go ahead and moderate because I was just about to bring up robotics. So so what I was going to say here is that I know that some people caught a lot of flack over the years of talking about how we're going to reduce labor in the industry with robotics, but we actually are where we are right now. And it's not a matter of intentionally reducing it. There isn't enough labor around. So we start to see self-service operations out there, micro markets and things. We start to see, I don't know why we haven't seen more vending, by the way, other than the robotic salad bar. I haven't seen, McDonald's was testing, well, it was for marketing purposes, but we still haven't seen a lot of robotics yet there. We are seeing robotic hamburger flippers, and those are all connected devices, by the way, sharing a lot of data. Okay, so I get that, and the smaller footprint that Karen talked about, it's certainly a challenge and an issue as well. But it is about the data at the end of the day, because all of this, and it has to be secure, even for how we operate. And I'm sure that Karen, somebody is probably looking at some of these innovative things as well to reduce footprint, reduce labor, increase, places of distribution.
Yeah, I mean, again, like you pointed out, Hoot's Wings, smaller footprint, less employees in the restaurant. Full-size Hooters has anywhere from 50 to 70 employees, and when they're fully staffed and plus management, in the Hoot's Wings restaurant, you're running around 15 to 17 employees. So, and your output is, pretty good. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, we've gotten some questions from our audience, and it's actually sort of diverse in the question area here. So we've had one person who's asked us about cloud-based EPOS systems. So we know where he or she may be, and the API into the EPOS for delivery, takeout, and dine-in guest self-order. And people talked about point of failure. How reliant are we on the point of sale systems today still as the central hub for point of failure when you have all these points coming in?
I've sat on a bunch of, roundtables and workshops about trying to create API standardizations and talking about, how much we talk about cloud POS, we talk about abstracting the POS from the process, but at the end of the day, it's still integral. And so you need to make sure that you have a way to have tight integrations into the POS for probably still some time to come. And as we said, it's not necessarily the transaction point. You're not processing through that, but it's kind of part of the customer experience management. It's kind of the order management, inventory. It's become a lot of other things in the vein of it not being transactional anymore. It's kind of that hub, that conduit for all of these things that come inside of your environment. Even as we try to cloudify it, there's still going to be that reliance on-premises POS and yes, still cloud POS. So for quite some time to come, until we have standardizations with these APIs and third parties, it's going to be a challenge we're going to have to try to overcome.
Yeah, I would say, it is a combination. You still have to have a point of sale in the restaurant today. I know there's different, point of sale companies out there that are migrating, their POS services to the cloud. For us, we have a custom point of sale system in our Hooters restaurant. So, even with my small staff, we have a development team that's doing that development. And then we're also building a lot of the services in Azure. So, the menus are up there. We're doing the integrations between delivery companies and online companies there, and then pushing the orders to the restaurants. So, and the same on our commercial systems on the other side, so I think, it's a combination that you have to go through.
Well, listen, we had another question that came in. So I know, people have taken a look at, especially now because of this, mobile technologies, tablets and phones and all kinds of things there. Clearly people are using the same devices to connect within the store on multiple types of things, from inventory to training to point of sale to kiosk, right? Is there any special security that they need to be considering as same device, but all kinds of applications, and just avoiding any pitfalls on, especially with mobile devices, being used in all this?
I mean, you have to make sure that you're segmenting the process of whatever it's providing at the time. If we talk about, normally you're doing line busting or something else, but that's kind of queuing management. That's not necessarily taking the payment. You want to be able to segment that out, either if it's done via software on the tablet, or you can do segmentation through the network. I think we're kind of going towards this model, what's called zero trust, right? We make sure that we segment the applications, we segment the network as much as possible. So yes, we can ride on using the same tablet because we put in the protections of this segmentation to make sure that those applications don't talk to each other. It can be difficult to implement, and I think we're getting towards a time where it's going to be a lot easier and a lot more commonplace. But right now, I think we still see some pitfalls of the same device or the same network used that shouldn't be, right? Guest traffic riding on the same as POS, or guests on the same as your internal back of house systems. We still are seeing a lot of times that that's not being done all the time correctly. So we need to get towards at least the basics of better internal segmentation, and then hopefully we can move towards this, this model of what we call zero trust.
But Courtney, before we leave off of that, also, doesn't it sort of depend on the devices that are being used as well? Because if people are using personal devices or smart
Sure.
devices, there may be different regulations and privacy regulations connecting data on something like a phone, versus a tablet versus a PC, and how are you going to carry that across the board?
Absolutely. I mean, it's difficult to bring personal devices ever into this loop, not only from a security standpoint, but also from legal standpoint. If they're using their personal device, you got to pay them when they're doing training, all of these things. You don't know when they're doing that. It's much more difficult to gain the access to a personal device and put the proper amount of security controls in place on a personal device. We've never seen it perfected per se. And so normally having a dedicated device or a dedicated network or something is a lot simpler to do. Not saying bring your own device isn't possible. It just brings in a whole lot more headaches, both from a security standpoint and then from a, from the
It
data
seems
privacy.
like, though, we've told the guests to bring their own device, and then even in some places where they had full service, we're telling the guests, go ahead and order on your own.
Oh, the
So-
guest. Yeah.
Yeah, so the guest, but wait a minute. So if you got it to the guest, you might as well just take it to the employee as well. So Karen, I know that people have talked about bring your own device for a long time on the employee side, but are we now getting there where it's probably going to be the reality and sometime in the near future?
Yeah, we're doing, some of that. It's mostly, they are using their own device, but through applications that we have with our vendor partners. So it's not, really that they're using, their personal devices for, those kinds of transactions. I think, as I saw one of the questions come up, somebody asked about tablets, and any of the tablets that we are using tablets in the restaurant for training and for, a variety of different functions within operations. And so what we do there is we have mobile device management on those devices. And, we need to manage those devices from a company standpoint versus, just leaving them wide open. And Courtney, I agree wholeheartedly. You have to have your network segmented, so that, you protect it as much as possible.
So, you did bring up, a multi-channel, and we did have somebody raise a question about, single point of failure, which really was something in the past. But I guess because you have multiple devices, being able to access things differently, you really don't end up with a singular point of fail, even if it's the point of sale software itself. I guess you could always just shift over to your online ordering and just run that in store.
Right. Yeah. Well, we do. We have all of our call-in orders, as an example, are being run through our online ordering site. So we use a third party to, manage those call-in orders, and they're using our online ordering site. Yeah, we absolutely could fail over to, online ordering. And the difficult part, though, is that you have to be a little more prepared for that, and that is, you have to be able to know where they're sitting in the restaurant in order to deliver their food to them. So, you got to do that work as well.
Yeah, but in-store GPS, I mean, the positioning, people are going to know that anyway, the coordinates. I think the whole idea of the 50 feet off isn't there anymore. So you sort of get it, right? It's certainly getting there. So I don't know, Courtney, if you wanted to add anything to that, but because I know we started with you on Bring Your Own and how it's all integrating different devices and single point of failure, but
Yeah.
it really doesn't seem to be that way anymore.
No, I don't think so. We've gone to a more easily accessible omni-channel experience directly inside the store, and we've built in resiliencies by allowing this flexibility devices. Does it have, some inherent risk? Sure. But does it have, obviously added benefits? Absolutely. So I think we have to just weigh those. What are the risks versus what are the benefits? And it's not going to be used as the go-to, right? You've set up your primary methods of ordering and fulfilling and all of that, but it can be used in the event that something goes wrong. And we talked about it. In the event that something goes wrong, we want to protect that always on experience. And this is just another way to do that.
I guess the good news for us is that it is about risk, right? But the good news for us is that because all these different applications are facing the same thing, that it's not one place anymore. They all really are facing the same types of privacy, data security, and so each one does their part. You just need to make sure when you're connecting them and doing the different pieces that, especially when you have a new provider that pops up to solve a solution immediately, that they've also thought of the same thing, right?
Yeah. They're doing their part, but there's not necessarily a standard or to say how well are they doing their part. There's a lot of implied trust right now, and I think we're going to start to get towards either companies themselves are going to create these validations. How do I know you're secure because you've met these standards? Or until we get to that mature federal standard that everybody has to adhere to, you at least check these boxes. It's still going to be a little bit Wild West. It's getting much better, but we hope right now that everybody's doing their part, but there's not tried and true ways yet to validate.
Right. So just to wrap us up here, I know somebody had asked a question about budget. But on the other hand, we're not going to wrap up with a budget question. Not everybody has the same budget as everybody else that's out there. So is there something that each of you want to just make sure you point out, that no matter how big or small, and how many applications you have to add in, because it is about adding in the different parts and pieces that you need today, that people should be remembering as a takeaway, either as a pitfall or a recommendation that you would make, that, hey, if you're just going to think about these things, just ask these couple of questions, as you go to it. And Courtney, maybe we'll start with you, and then we'll allow Karen to wrap us up.
Yeah, I would say, from our side, when making investments in technology, wherever it is throughout the entire environment, we know it may not be all homogenous. It's not all going to come from single vendors. We love to subscribe to platforms because it's easier to manage. But I think the key things are just make sure whatever technology purchases there are, or what investments you're making, has integrations into your environment, that it's not being managed, that it's not creating gaps where you're having to manage different consoles or go to different places to gain the data. Integration is key. And then, as we said, automation, because it does so many things to shore up the skills gap, shore up the labor gap, and just help you work smarter, not harder. So I think integration and automation should be top of mind on any technology going forward. Yes, we've seen investments in technology to solve point in time challenges, but be thinking towards the future. How is this going to set me up for future growth?
Karen?
Yeah, and I think all of the above, but also for us, it's what's going to grow sales, right? How are we going to improve our sales? How are we going to take care of our people? What do we need to do to protect the company, right? And how do we improve our processes? Because I think, like many restaurant companies, we've been dealing with, spreadsheets all over the place, for a number of years. And, how do we improve our processes so that we can help our people do their jobs more efficiently? So, those are typically our orders of importance there.
Yeah.
So clearly, I think the message that we got out of, today's webinar, first of all, is that data is probably the key and at the center of all of this, right? Because whether it's improving our processes, whether it's getting to the bottom line, using less staff, doing non-traditional locations, connecting with the guests, employees, remote locations, I think that it's the driving thing that's going to allow us to do all these things and have change. I think we also got out of this that there is a lot of data available, that we may be able to get to the personalized experiences, keeping in mind the threat vectors. I'm learning some words here that I want to make sure we remember as we do this, that it all comes together. But I do believe that in rounding this thing up, that what we've heard is that while there have been challenges, actually we have come out of this with more data, which is creating more opportunities. And the idea is to keep it safe and secure across the board, with that. So with that, I want to really thank Fortinet for bringing this forward, but I want to thank Karen and Hooters of America for representing the QSR industry. That was a lot on your shoulders today. And there's a lot of data on your shoulders, Courtney. But I think this has been a good discussion, and it's great having both of you on it, since you both have both the operational and you have the data and the IT background as well. Their contact information is on this screen, so they're certainly happy to continue the discussion outside of the webinar today. And again, I want to thank everyone for attending. Remind you that the webinar will be posted at Fortinet, the IFBTA, and on social media. And again, thank you for joining us today and supporting the industry as we go forward. So thank you.